or maybe it's just imprinted on my mind because I've attended many of these IMF meetings, but I am going to go there. I know you've done a lot of work on it. Geeta also has spoken about it a lot. But there is one of the themes that has emerged in the last couple of years is there is a tendency now for economies to become more protectionist. There is a feeling that, at a state level, you want to bolster the national economy at the expense potentially of trade with some of your close allies. And, you see it in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, you see it in China with the push for the transition. The state is playing an ever increasingly large role in terms of driving economic activity. And I just wonder, if you look about it again through the lens of growth, because that's what our panel is about, whether ultimately this is a good thing. Is this going to lead to the growth outcomes that we would like to see?
When we look at the trajectory as of now, it is a rather depressing story. Medium-term growth is weak by historic standards. I compare this trajectory to a ski slope. So we expect, if the previous decade average growth was 3.8%, we expect this decade growth to be around 3%, much lower than before. Why is this happening? It is happening for two broad reasons. One is not enough productivity to lift up growth. In fact, we did some analysis. It says half of this slowdown in productivity is productivity is half of the reason why we have this slowdown of growth in advanced economies and big emerging market economies. Almost all of the slowdown in low-income countries. Investing in people, investing in innovation, this is a must if we want to see productivity coming up. The second reason is geoeconomic fragmentation. Our analysis shows that if we bring the power of trade and access to finance in a more open and inclusive manner, by the end of the decade, global growth can go up by 1.2%. In other words, all this growth lost from the previous decade can come back. Would it happen? It depends very much on the way in which we approach the question of security of supplies that is genuinely one policymakers are wrestling with. COVID and the war in Ukraine told us that relying on single source for your supplies is potentially catastrophic, that diversifying the supply chains is a must, that some redundancy in supply chains is a necessity. The question is, are we going to do what is necessary and not more, or we would go further? And at this point, the indications are troubling. We have seen over the last years trade restrictions quadrupling. And when we analyze industrial policy measures, 2,500 of those have been taken over the last years. 17% of them are trade disrupting, negative for trade measures. So we have industrial policy that may be justified because you want to accelerate decarbonization. That was the logic behind some of the measures today, yes. But are you doing it wisely? And the jury is not out. The jury has pronounced itself. We're going too far in that direction. So what do we do at the IMF? What we are doing is we are providing the analytical underpinning for decisions that would strengthen supply chains, that would bring some of the benefits of industrial policy. Let's remember, industrial policy is justified when there are market failures, and the state steps forward to correct them. But please don't do more than it is necessary. Why? because then what we end up with is misallocation of resources, of capital and labor. And when that happens, guess what? We're poorer. So I appeal to rational decision-making that recognizes no more we can bring that notion of just in time as the only one. No more we can look only at cost considerations when we design supply chains, but don't go overboard. Don't throw this beautiful trade baby with the bath water.
Mana, may I comment? I think this is actually very critical. Two things actually to note. One is there is a very heavy price for fragmentation that is going to be paid by everybody around the world, which is inflation. Fragmentation means redundancy, means inefficiency, which means higher cost. So it's not about competitiveness and who's the cheapest will be provided to the world, but rather really through protectionism you will get actually more expensive, more inefficient industries being protected, which means really inflation. Yeah. And then you get into this vicious cycle. The second is, obviously we need, as Kristalina said, we need to de-risk, the supply chain, but then there is a big difference between de-risking supply chain and then using it as a geopolitical tool, really, to hurt your opponents. I've said in the previous WEF meeting, and I think in our IMF Marrakesh meeting, that I was, and I have continued to be optimist. I think countries are feeling the pain of actually fragmentation. I hope wisdom would prevail and they will correct course, because unfortunately what we are seeing even until today, as we speak, more negative actions being taken that are really not economically driven to de-risk, but rather driven by politics.
I want to ask you a Saudi-specific question, because we're here, we talk about the Saudi 2030 vision, and of course that's a very good example of a medium-term growth plan. And a big part of that, the pillar, is bolstering the non-oil economy. And if you look at the numbers last year, of course, Saudi Arabia went through a challenging year economically, but the non-oil sector was the outperformer versus the oil sector. Have you had to reassess the medium-term plans because of the factors that we were talking about earlier? And you said, there's no ego with your planning. When the facts change, you obviously have to change your plans as well. Have you had to, say, mark to market your expectations of what you can achieve with the Saudi 2030 vision?
The short answer is absolutely yes. But let me just clarify two things that are very important. Vision 2030 is about actually the non-oil GDP. And to the point of His Excellency about quality and quantity, Saudi Arabia is able, and was able last year, to make the growth 10% GDP. Literally. And I'm not exaggerating, okay? We produce 9 million barrels a day of oil last year. We could have actually put the accelerator on and produce 10. That will give us about 8% GDP growth. And we could have even accelerated more and produced 11. And that will give us 15% GDP growth. And if we wanted to accelerate more, we have the capacity to produce 12.
12, that's the maximum.
And that will give us 25%. And I can make this year-on-year 10% for the next 5 years. But this is not a quality growth. This is quantity growth, okay? What is important for us is the non-oil GDP. The non-oil GDP has actually, even last year when we saw our GDP, total GDP, almost flat, almost zero, actually non-oil GDP grew at 4.4%, which is very healthy compared to the world. So that is really the focus. Vision 2030 about empowering private sector, which is a point I missed on the first point you asked. Private sector enablement is key in any plans that you put forward. The government role is to be out of business. The government role is to make policies to enable the private sector, but not to actually do the business. It's the private sector business. And if you are able to do the right policy structure, you will enable the private sector, you will actually have sustainable, more inclusive growth. That's what Vision 2030 about, and I can tell you halfway now, we are actually very pleased. We are not complacent, but we are very pleased with what was achieved. And I think the report was, the half journey report was announced yesterday or the day before, where actually 87% of the targets are on track. A lot of targets have been over-delivered. There are challenges, obviously, and this is why I said we don't have ego. We will change course, we will adjust, we will extend some of the projects, we will downscale some of the projects, we will accelerate other projects.
Well, we don't want you out of business because then I won't be able to talk to you.
He will be then doing the business of government.
Exactly.
Facilitate private sector's growth.
Absolutely.
Can I expand a bit about what Kristalina said about trade? Because when I was in Abu Dhabi, the MC30 in the WTO meeting, many talked about this year will be slightly better, more optimistic about things, but at the same time, there is concern about, yes, geopolitics is definitely an issue being used as, technology security, etc., but also about non-tariff barriers under the name, under the pretext of sustainability. There will be socio-economic impact if that transition towards sustainability using trade parameters, where, for example, a country that may not be ready to meet the conditions of sustainability through capacity issues, not just monetary issues, but you need capacity building at the same time, then you will see that that growth that we're talking about today will not be an inclusive one. So I think when, for Malaysia, we have 14 bilateral and multilateral FTAs. So we are, in many of those discussions, and we are seeing that sometimes we need to be very careful. You talk about, yes, supply chain resiliency, supply chain security, and therefore you have in fact, sometimes very explicitly trade barriers, but the non-trade barriers also increasing, right? And this will affect the quality of growth that we want to see, because we are seeing more and more countries, especially developing countries and LDCs as well, are finding it difficult to meet those standards, and it will have an impact to them. I'm not saying that they shouldn't aspire to meet, but I think the transition to meet that standards has to be done equitably. And you need, again, the more developed nations to be also participating in this.
I've got a couple of minutes before...
Just one addition to that point. It is a slippery slope. Once a measure is taken by one country, history says 75% probability, reciprocity from other countries. So where do we end? In a very bad place.
Final question that I'm going to put to both of you, because I know this is a subject close to your heart. What is the type of cooperation we need to see between richer countries and lower income developing countries?
Fair. And that means poor countries also have to do their part. They need to collect taxes, they need to fight corruption, they need to improve the quality of spending, they need to demonstrate that they are committed to their own people. And the response must be that they get a huge deal of international support in that restructuring, in helping them to meet their financial needs with support from outside. it is genuinely the moment to recognize that we are in this small boat called world together. And we cannot say, the rich countries cannot say to the poor, oh, you know what, your side of the boat is leaking. We would all sink.
Well said, Kristalina. I would not have said it better. I think few things. One is there is a promising, I can tell you, there is actually a promising trajectory in empowering multilateral development institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. And what is even more interesting and helpful is there is a significantly better coordination and cooperation between them. And I've seen it firsthand recently, where they actually almost have a task force collectively to help individual countries that are in need. And I've said this before, and I will repeat it again. Without an extensive reform, without countries who are recipients of support doing their part, as Kristalina said, I think we will just be putting good money after bad. So we need to make sure that we encourage them, not only with providing financial support, but also technical support and making sure that we develop their own people to actually do the right thing. Second, I think this is very important. We should avoid forcing them to make a choice between, two countries or two groups of countries. I think it is very difficult to go to Africa and say, listen, if you want us to help you, you need to stop dealing with China. Or if you want us to help you, you need to stop dealing with the G7 or the US. That is not a fair choice to put before them, because they need all the help they can, whether it is from the south or from north. And I think we are seeing actually a better way of approaching this now, although I think we can look for more.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to leave it. We've gone through a lot already on this panel about the now, the future, geoeconomic fragmentation, some of the barriers that are going up. I think we all agree that too many barriers is not a good thing, could be inflationary, and the importance of cooperation. I started off this panel by saying that we're going to end with a couple of minutes from Sadia Zahidi, who's the Managing Director of the World Economic Forum, to talk us through the initiative, the Future of Growth initiative. But before we do that, I just want to thank the panelists so much. I really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you, Managing Director, Your Excellencies. Really appreciate it. Sadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jumana, and thank you so much to all the panelists for this very rich discussion, and really the right one to get us started for the next 2 days of conversation here in Riyadh. We kicked off in Davos the Future of Growth initiative. It's a 2-year set of work, and there are 3 ways that we invite you to get involved. One is the data that is helping provide a dashboard for countries to look at both quantity and quality measures. You can download that here in this room and continue to stay involved in that conversation. No data is perfect, but we're trying to get that conversation started. The second way is the global conversation around what should be the right framework for looking at quantity and quality growth. Please join the Growth Consortium. Please join the dialogues on that. That will continue over the course of the next 2 years at every activity that the World Economic Forum will be holding. And then the third way is country-level dialogues, because there is an element of that that has to be customized, and we will be kicking off with at least 5 countries this year, country-specific dialogues, and more to come over the course of the next year. So thank you again to all the panelists for the conversation, and please join this 2-year initiative.
Thank you.
We can go.
Thank you. I think we need to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After